Hello and welcome back to CDO Magazine's Tech Talks. I'm Nick Halsey, CEO of Akira Software, starting our third segment with JoAnn Stonier from CDO of Mastercard. Welcome back, JoAnn. We've talked a lot in the first two segments about the digital transformation that Mastercard has gone through and going from a privacy-first focus to one of building new digital transformation products across a variety of sectors. And of course, digital transformation is the buzzword of the moment. Every company is trying to go through that. Large organizations are at the forefront, but you work with lots and lots of smaller organizations who also would like to take advantage of digital transformation. How is some of the work that you've been doing enabling some of your customers to move forward on their journeys?
Yeah, I think we've always been very customer focused, but I think COVID really brought this to the front, that we needed to be ready to really assist our customers with different types of data-driven insights. We've always done that. Ever since I've been at the company, we've had, helped our banks with different insights related to their data, our merchants as well. But COVID has just accelerated everything, right? I think all of us are feeling that in our day-to-day, but the need and the understanding that data could really hold the answers to questions. And I think Mastercard is just a natural partner for small businesses and others for them to turn to as they were trying to navigate a world that literally changed overnight for many of them. And what we found ourselves doing was learning very quickly that our data from one market could be helpful to similar businesses in another market. So as this pandemic began to roll out, right, we could take learnings from different types of businesses in, let's say, Asia, and then watch what happened when they closed, and then when they opened and reopened, what could similar types of businesses in either Europe or the United States, North America, Latin America, begin to expect for their reopenings in different industries. And obviously some industries are suffering more than others, but it was helpful information to understand what was happening and how would consumers be able to come back, or were there ways to help a business get reestablished and on their feet? And then also issues like cash flow, right? Payments help merchants with their accounts receivable, right? And so understanding what would be happening, I think also helped smaller businesses understand, should we stay open? Should we shut? Should we be part-time? How long should we try to stay closed or open? Could we go into alternative services? Was that going to be helpful or not? And I feel like, there's now much more data that we can use to help all of our business partners understand kind of this new world that we're living in. But in the early days, we were very quickly trying to stand up the right kinds of analytics and the right kinds of reports that were going to be helpful from an econometric perspective for our different customer segments. And I'm happy to say that we have done some of that work.
That sounds great, and I could see how valuable that would be to the retailers and all of the people operating in the network. On the other end of the spectrum, how about the government agencies that are trying to manage through this crisis and analyze the data? Have you been also trying to assist at the federal level and state as well?
Yes, we have. I mean, I think in the beginning, it was really interesting moments in the beginning. I mean, I think we've lived a lifetime since this has begun, right? But if you throw yourself back to the springtime, when everything was beginning to unfold, the first requests we were getting from governments were trying to figure out tracking and tracing applications, right? How could they figure out which citizens were positive with the virus, which citizens were negative, and there was much more hope that I think that a vaccine was going to be and treatments were going to be forthcoming more quickly. So we were getting a lot of inquiries about, could our point of sale data be helpful in tracing people's whereabouts, right? If you transacted someplace, could that be given to the government that could be combined with health data that could then be useful for tracing applications? So there was a flurry of inquiry around that. I think that has died down a bit as the pandemic has worn on. And instead now we're working more with governments also about economic outlooks, right? As this time continues, what should we be anticipating? What's the pattern really? What industries are, and what's the impact now that we've gone through 6 months, give or take, what's the impact of this and what's the potential impact should we be having another 6 months if they look like the first months of this crisis, the second month, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and in which geography, right? So there's much more information that we can now help governments try to do some planning compared to what we had in the earliest days. So yes, we're also working with governments.
Yeah, the power of the comparative analytics is so compelling, and that resonated with me. At Okura, we're focused on providing a framework for delivering secure data access so that the right person gets the right data in the right format at the right time, right?
Yep.
We just talked about two very different use cases of the small business leveraging a certain view of that data against sort of the way a large government agency would look in broad swaths
and governments want to understand the impact to industry too, by segment, and what industry, which sectors are doing better than others, as different governments have had different reactions and different responsibilities and payouts and different types of aid that they're providing to different parts of their citizenry, right?
It's interesting you mentioned different industry segments, because I was going to ask you about that. Financial services has some very specialized needs and requirements that you have to focus on. Mm-hmm. But as we talked about, every organization is trying to do digital transformation. What do you think is applicable across industry versus perhaps what is really limited to financial services?
Well, I think every industry wants to understand their customer, right? So every industry wants to understand what's happening with their customers at this time, right? Both at this time for COVID, but just generally, right? I don't know any business that doesn't care about their customers, right? And so if we can give any kind of insights into how patterns of populations work and are moving, that's helpful to different types of businesses, different kinds of governments to understand how individuals are behaving, right? I think in COVID, that information is helpful, but oftentimes it's just confirming what companies, organizations, small businesses are already seeing, right? I think the more interesting thing is what can we also know from past crises, right? So are we seeing anything from any other information sets, any other data points, right? So we hear a lot, well, what happened after 9/11 in New York? Can that be something that can be predictive? So we also are working with different research organizations to try to give them some information insights to see, is there anything that when you combine information that could be helpful, right? I think that is one of the most compelling things about COVID that we are coming to realize is that while our data is good for a lot of individualized insights and projects for customers, that we also realize that the bigger questions, like the question of how do you solve COVID, how do you do kind of the propensity for the future, how do you get out of this one, right? Not that we have a magic answer, requires the sharing of multiple data sets by multiple parties. And we still, as a society, do not have easy answers for that. And I think those are the kinds of projects that now we are looking at as an organization with others, that how do you do data sharing for the future? So that when we have events like COVID that require so many organizations to cooperate, how do you really do that? Those are the kinds of projects and methodologies that for Mastercard, we want to do it in a way that our privacy is honored, security is honored, but that we also can get those kind of insights that cut across all types of sectors. Those would be that's really where we wish we could be if we were around the clock even 6 months ago. I think we're getting better at those kinds of things now, but it is quite a challenge. We've always been able to share one-on-one, right? But big groups of companies all sharing, I'm not sure we have that methodology figured out.
Well, and even before sharing, most people are a priori trying to solve the problem of managing secure data access within their own organization. But you bring up an excellent point, which is we all anticipate the value of being able to share and collaborate across businesses, across sectors. It sounds like you guys are beginning to put your toe in the water. Any lessons learned that you could share with your peers?
Well, we don't share raw data, we share insights, right? And we've done projects with researchers where we've created secured sandboxes where a researcher will come into our sandbox, work with our data scientists to actually prove a theory or prove a case, right? We will do that a lot for social impact type of research studies. And that works to great effect. The question is, can you do that with multiple parties with multiple data sets, right? Well, whose standards are you going to follow, right? I believe my standards are really good, but it may not work for another data set, right? So then how can you come up with the mutuality so that more than one data set can be put into a sandbox that you can agree on how that would be done? It gets very, very difficult. And even if I'm going to contribute insights, right, who's going to be supervising that to make sure that all of the protocols that you create will be followed, right? It's a pretty big ecosystem that has to be created to do that well. So we've certainly, I think, have very good practices one-on-one or for specific tasks or projects that we've taken on. The question is, how do you supersize that? And I think that we're beginning to try to work with other companies as part of our data responsibility effort, right? How do you do that in a very responsible way? COVID has made us want to move faster. Everything you want to do faster. How do you do it responsibly and faster? There's a little bit of a tension there, but those are the things we're looking at.
But financial services is on the cutting edge of this because obviously you have many institutions, you know,
yeah.
and you're moving information and data flows between you.
But so we've done that for years, right? I mean, financial services, if you think about it, most of our products and solutions can be reduced to data pretty easily, right? They're numerate, they're numbers based, right? So we have a little bit of a leg up, but we're also regulated. So we also, right, in some ways, we're a really good use case, right? Because we need to do it in a fashion that also complies with a whole host of regulation, right? And if you're going to add in advanced tools, we haven't talked about this very much, like AI and machine learning, you also have to be really careful about things like bias in data, right? So you've got to be really careful that you look at the bias in the raw data, the quality of the data, is the data fit for the use case that you're actually pursuing, the question you're trying to answer. You've got to look at the methodology you're using, right? Is there bias in your methodology, right? You got to be careful of things like confirmation bias, right? And, you know, the bias in the very people that are pursuing the question. So the process bias. And then you have to look at the output, right? And so making sure that the model itself didn't somehow become corrupt with the inputs, right? Or the methodology. And so we have a process in Mastercard that we are using to try to, our AI governance process tries to look at every step of the way. And financial data, I think, is sometimes best suited for some of these tasks. But it also, we have, I think, a very strong fiduciary responsibility as financial companies, right? We hold individuals' assets, right? We process them in the standpoint of my company of payments, right? But it's about people's, you know, their ability to kind of transact in a world. And so you need to just recognize that as a result, we need to be very careful in what we do. And I think financial companies have that responsibility, and therefore they've entered the digital age very willingly because their products translate to it. But I also think they understand that they have this big responsibility. But the world's expanding, right? Things like, you know, we have open banking and the advancement of technology that's happening. We have more and more of a demand now for new services, mortgage services online, insurance, investments, right? That a next generation of user is going to expect that all of the investments that I think financial companies have made to provide privacy and security and compliance and handle things like bias are going to be needed in the next generation of products and solutions. So I think the financial industry as a sector has a lot of responsibility ethically for the next generation of data use.
I couldn't agree more, and it's great to hear you say that. And one of the reasons we very much wanted to feature you on the show is because how much ahead of the market you guys are in the financial services sector and at Mastercard.
Oh, thank you.
And I would just want to close. I think that your point is absolutely critical. Most organizations are just starting to realize this notion as they adopt machine learning and AI, that bias in the data and bias in the algorithms, just like we may have some institutional bias in our society. You're not even aware that it's there, but it's a very important lesson. If you don't plan ahead to address that problem, you're probably going to wind up with skewed results of your analytic initiatives.
The product or solution will not be as good as if you looked for it, right? I mean, I use the example of if you only have data on that the data set was created on men, right? And the product is going to be used by both men and women, it will be skewed by height. Chances are, right? That it will, I use the overhead bin problem on most airplanes, right? How many women have you seen climbing on the seat to get the stuff right out of the overhead bin? It's because it's used in average, right? For the most part in the design. We will have that kind of design challenge amplified, right? If we're not careful in what was in that initial data set and in the methodology, unless we look, right? We have to look.
That's right. And I think probably when they did the seat width design, they weren't really looking at the average American, I'll just say.
Well, maybe our waistlines have expanded a little bit too, but in COVID for sure.
It just means that standards need to evolve over time and algorithms need to evolve over time. So
absolutely.
JoAnn, it's been great talking with you. I'm afraid we're out of time on this third segment. I hope our audience gets to watch all three of them. Thank you very much, and it was great to spend time with you this morning.
Thanks for having me.